In the series, we've been looking at the E-2 investor visa requirements. In this video, we're taking a look at what happens after you've been approved and you need to renew your visa. When should you renew your E-2 visa? Where should you renew it? And what will the government be looking for when you renew it? Hi, I'm Dustin Saldarriaga, an immigration lawyer with Scott Legal PC in New York City. Before we dive in, if you're interested in more information about the E-2 visa and its requirements, we've posted to our YouTube channel our full webinar on the E-2 visa. We also share a lot of free information about the E-2 visa and other visas on our blog. We'll link to both our blog and our YouTube channel below. Finally, please remember that no video or blog post can replace the value of working directly with an immigration lawyer who can navigate the specific nuances of your application. So let's talk about E-2 visa renewals. One of the key advantages of an E-2 investor visa is that it can be renewed indefinitely. There's no limit to the number of times it can be renewed as long as the investor and the business continue to meet the E-2 requirements. So, when should you start thinking about renewing your E-2 visa? Since for a renewal, the government will want to see that the business has generated sufficient income to employ U.S. workers, it's always good to start thinking about a renewal from day one and to orient the business to start generating income and employing workers from that day onward. But more specific to the question, the renewal process should be started at least a few months before the visa expires in order to make sure that there is no interruption in the validity of the visa. As a result of the COVID pandemic, many consulates are experiencing delays. A qualified lawyer can help you gauge how extensive the delays at a specific consulate are, which will help with the planning process. Starting several months in advance will also help improve your chances of scheduling your visa interview at a time that works for you, particularly if you have work or family commitments that require you to be physically present within the U.S. on or by a certain date. If you choose to extend your E-2 status through USCIS rather than applying through a consulate, an option we will discuss in more detail later in this video, remember that you must either file the extension application or depart from the U.S. before your Form I-94 expires. So be sure to keep an eye on your I-94 expiration date. In terms of where to renew, your options are through U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, or USCIS, from within the U.S., or at a consulate abroad. Since the COVID pandemic has caused widespread delays at consulates and hampered international travel, many more applicants are opting to apply through USCIS rather than at a consulate abroad. Nonetheless, it's generally recommended that the E-2 investor renew their E-2 visa at a consulate rather than USCIS. This is because USCIS can only extend the E-2 investor's status, not their visa validity period. As a result, USCIS can approve up to 2 years of additional E-2 status, but as soon as the E-2 investor leaves the United States, they would need to apply for a visa at a consulate in order to re-enter the U.S. As a result, USCIS can approve up to 2 years of additional E-2 status, but as soon as the E-2 investor leaves the United States, they would need to apply for a visa at a consulate abroad in order to re-enter the U.S. in E-2 status. However, if the E-2 investor has no need to leave the United States, they can extend their E-2 status from within the U.S. indefinitely through USCIS. Also worth noting is that if the E-2 investor received their initial E-2 visa at a consulate, rather than by changing to E-2 status from within the U.S. through USCIS, USCIS will expect to receive all of the documents that were submitted with the initial application to the consulate. USCIS tends to more closely scrutinize certain aspects of an application more than consulates do, including in particular the documentation showing the source and trail of funds from their origin into the E-2 business. As a result, an applicant who received an E-2 visa through a consulate who then applies for an extension through USCIS runs the risk of a denial if USCIS determines that the documentation that was submitted with their initial application was lacking, particularly regarding documents showing the source of the funds invested into the business. Applicants whose applications have potential gaps in documentation should consider bolstering their application with additional documents in order to meet the higher standard applied by USCIS. A couple additional notes about applying for an extension through USCIS. First, if the E-2 investor is filing for an extension with the same E-2 company and the application is filed before the I-94 expires, the investor is eligible for an automatic extension of 240 days to work for the business while USCIS adjudicates the extension application. Also, USCIS provides an option to expedite the extension application through a service called premium processing. By selecting premium processing, which requires an additional fee of $2,500 as of the date of this video, USCIS guarantees a response within 15 calendar days of the date the application was submitted. If the response is a request for additional evidence, USCIS will provide a subsequent response within 15 calendar days of when the response to the request for evidence is received. As mentioned before, it's generally recommended that the E-2 investor apply to renew their E-2 visa at the consulate abroad that initially approved the visa. Many consulates will register the E-2 company, which means that they maintain information about the company. This usually enables these consulates to accept a streamlined application, which saves the applicant time as they prepared the renewal application package. For example, some consulates that registered the E-2 business will only request documents showing proof of ownership, company tax returns, and tax records showing compensation to workers, such as IRS W-2 or 1099 forms. In some cases, it could be advantageous for the investor to apply for the renewal at a different consulate. Although the E-2 requirements are largely the same across all consulates around the world, different consulates do scrutinize certain aspects of the applications differently. This could be relevant if, for example, the consulate that initially approved the visa is particularly strict on a certain aspect of the visa application on which the renewal application is weak. With the spread of COVID-19, many consulates stopped accepting applications from third country nationals, meaning those applicants who had few or no ties to the country where the consulate was located. Before submitting an application to a consulate, particularly at a consulate different from the one where the initial application was submitted, be sure to confirm with the consulate that it will receive your renewal application. For those applicants who have a strong renewal application, the location where they apply for the renewal becomes less important. Next, let's take a look at what makes for a strong renewal application. What is the government, whether USCIS or a consulate, looking for in an E-2 investor visa renewal application? One of the key considerations is whether the business has generated income and created jobs for U.S. workers. As a result, the most important documents that can be included in the renewal application are usually the company's tax returns and tax records showing that they employ U.S. workers, such as W-2 and 1099 forms. An E-2 business should generate at least 3 to 4 full-time equivalent jobs for U.S. workers within 5 years of beginning normal business operations. If the E-2 business has done this, the odds that its renewal application will be approved are generally good. If the E-2 business has done this, the odds that its renewal application will be approved are generally good. If it has not employed U.S. workers, though, this can be a critical weakness. Ideally, the government will want to see that you've achieved the hiring projections that you provided with your initial E-2 application. If you have not achieved your hiring projections, but you have nonetheless employed at least 3 full-time equivalent U.S. workers, you should provide an explanation as to why the business did not achieve its targets, but still make clear that you satisfy the marginality requirement. If you have not hired at least 3 U.S. workers by the time you apply to renew the E-2 visa, it's essential that you clearly explain why the business failed to do so and what you'll do moving forward to ensure that the business does get back on track to employ U.S. workers. A business plan, though generally not necessary for a renewal application, could be helpful to show this. The government will also want to see that the company is meeting its revenue targets. The officer will review tax returns for the E-2 business. If tax returns are not available, the applicant can provide audited financial statements, bank statements, and other financial data that demonstrates its performance over time. Even if the company has not met its financial projections, most essential is that it generates sufficient income to hire U.S. workers. If the company has losses or if its viability is in doubt, the applicant should provide a clear and convincing explanation as to how the company will remedy this. Also, the applicant should highlight the company's successes, such as if it made a sufficient income to pay vendors and employees and to generate even a small profit. As is the case when the business has not hired at least 3 U.S. workers within 5 years, a business plan could also be important when the business's revenues are low or falling. This gives the applicant a chance to explain how they will get the business back on track. The government will also want to see evidence that the business is real and operating. As a result, the renewal application should include, for example, screenshots of an updated website and social media pages, an updated lease agreement, updated photos of the office space, photos of any projects the business is working on, recent business bank statements showing ongoing commercial activity, and contracts with existing clients or letters of intent from prospective clients. While no additional investment is usually necessary for a renewal application, if additional funds have been invested into the business that were not generated from the company's revenue, proof of this additional investment can be included in the application, along with documentation showing the source and trail of the funds. It's also possible that the government will want to see that the business has effectively executed its marketing and sales plan. Documentation such as copies of online reviews and any awards, recognition, or publicity the business has received can be particularly persuasive to the reviewing officer. On the other hand, if the business has not followed its marketing and sales plan since opening, it could be good to provide an explanation about why the plan has changed. In the end, the government will want to be sure that the E-2 investor and business continue to meet the E-2 requirements. As a result, it's critical that the applicant make sure that their ownership percentage does not drop below 50%, and that they keep an eye on the other threshold E-2 requirements. One final note. If the business or its operations have substantively changed since the initial E-2 application, it's strongly recommended that you speak with a qualified immigration lawyer to ensure that you properly notify the government of these changes. This could require that you file a new E-2 application rather than a renewal. We hope this video about renewing the E-2 visa was helpful. If it was, please click the like and subscribe buttons below to stay updated on future videos about visa options and travel to the US. Thank you for watching.